China's rise as an economic powerhouse can't help but threaten America's sense of itself as the world's top nation. Even if Xi Jinping had been Mother Teresa, China's rise couldn't have but threatened America's view of itself in the same way that Germany's rise in the late 19th century couldn't but threaten Britain's view of itself as the global top nation. As you mentioned before, we also have a very different economic relationship with China. Except for Taiwan, we have the biggest trade surplus of any nation with China. They take 36% of our exports. That's 8.5% of our GDP.
What is our future really going to look like? Can we actually still rely heavily, as we have done and has been expressed, I would suggest, our own national security spending, which has been low, and some would say substantially lower than necessary for us to have any sort of sense of self-reliance in our own defence, the ability to stand up for ourselves when a need arises. Mr. Trump should prompt us to do some of that thinking a little bit more energetically, I would suggest. The time is right for us to do that.
And I completely agree with that. I mean, my interpretation, which I've shared with others in writing and commentaries, is that the election that the Americans had in November last year tells us something quite profound about the American people themselves.
I think that's absolutely true. I would agree with all of that. And some of the practical questions that flow from that, things like, how do we define what we spend on defence? And are those definitions that are traditionally used, like percentage of GDP, are they meaningful enough for us to end up in the right place? Is the Navy, for example, in its current incarnation, about which I have been quoted in the Financial Review recently as describing it as in a state of chronic and accelerating decay, should we indeed be building our Navy's vessels in Australia? And there's a wealth of discussion of that issue, especially in the face of, well, we don't build aircraft, why should we build ships? That's not a valid comparison by any measure in my view.
How much Australia spends on defence, and importantly, how we spend it over what period of time, will be another very interesting conversation in this series.